Welcome to Black Hat Windows 2K Security, held February 14th through the 15th, 2001 in Las Vegas, Nevada. The following videotape was recorded live at the conference and produced by the Sound of Knowledge Incorporated. This is videotape number 18, Deep Knowledge Track, Auditing Binaries for Security Vulnerabilities.
To speak about auditing closed source applications for security vulnerabilities such as buffer overflows and format string bugs. And my speech will consist of two parts. One part which will start now and will be the more straightforward part where I just talk and explain relatively simple stuff. And then there will be a coffee break, and afterwards we'll have another half which is, well, the more complex stuff. So. Short speech outline. I'll start up with some legal considerations, because by reverse engineering other people's applications, you're treading on thin ice. Then I'll introduce you to the topic of auditing binaries and explain what different approaches to auditing binaries exist these days, what is being done, and so on. Then afterwards, I'll recapitulate C++ programming mistakes that can lead to remote code execution. Afterwards, I'll explain how to find them in a binary, and then I'll have a demonstration how I used the stuff I just explained to find a format string bug this time in Netscape Enterprise Web Server, which is now called IWS for iPlanet Web Server. So that's going to be the first half, then we'll take a break, which is very important, and go on to the second part, which will be a bit less structured, and I'll cover a variety of topics ranging from problems encountered when reverse engineering OOP applications, to manual structure and automatic structure reconstruction. And I'll cover automating the process of auditing binaries to a certain degree, because it's a very boring process. You would spend a lot of time in a disassembler just hitting away at stuff and looking at functions which, well, are not really dangerous. So I'm a lazy bastard. I'd like to have as little work as possible. So I'll go into automating what I'm doing. Then I'll have afterwards, because I don't have anything to talk about anymore, a free time to discuss the topic with anybody from the audience. And if not, we can just quit earlier, because I mean it's the last speech of the conference, and I don't think anybody's really into it to stay here until like 6 o'clock. Anyways, let's just start with the next slide. Legal considerations. By reverse engineering an application, you're breaking the shrink wrap agreement that comes with it. Each time you install something, you have to click on this nice shrink wrap license, where you basically forfeit all your rights to reverse engineer, decompile, whatever. So when you actually find a bug in a binary and you've broken the license agreement, you technically become liable to all the damage you do. So if you publish it and the company suffers an image loss, you're liable for that, or you can be held liable for that, theoretically. So up until now, I haven't been sued yet. I'm waiting for Netscape. And when I was in Amsterdam, Jennifer Grenick told me that she would defend me in a case that I got sued over that. But I mean, there's another simple way not to get sued. Just don't publish your work if you find something. So
ever challenge shrink wrap validity? It's not obvious that it's a valid binding contract.
Well, it hasn't been really challenged yet, because no company tried to sue anybody else who would then in turn challenge it. So, yeah, but DCSS is a different kind of thing. In that case, somebody sued and you could challenge it. But anyways, I don't think that most companies are willing to go after me, because I don't have any money. So there is a European Union law dating back to 1991, which is a EU directive on the legal protection of computer programs, which is not really a law, which is a directive to courts to act in a certain manner. So it is a bit of weird European Union politics. It grants everybody the right to decompile programs for interoperability purposes and for fixing bugs for error correction. Now, it does not allow you to find errors. It allows you to fix errors. That's a distinction that is very important here, because technically there are some other European Union laws that only allow you to do quality assurance by doing anything a normal user would do. So by reverse engineering, you're doing something a normal user would not do. So if you admit to having found the bug by reverse engineering, you could get into trouble. But once the bug is public, you can do reverse engineering to fix it. But these two rights cannot be contracted away, so the shrink wrap license at this point is void and null. So it's a bit of a shaky situation. In the US, we have a bit of a better situation because the DMCA specifically gives everybody the right to reverse engineer for interoperability, for encryption research, and for security testing. So security testing is what we're doing, so we're pretty safe. On the other hand, I'm not sure whether the rights granted in the DMCA can be contracted away. So you better ask your local lawyer or just don't get sued. Now, why would anybody want to look at disassembly all day or weeks? Why would anybody actually want to do this? There are several reasons. If you're a black hat, the main reason is many interesting systems, banks, firewalls, and so on, are running on closed source. I mean, how many open source firewalls are around? It's all Firewall 1, Gauntlet, Sidewinder, whatever. Firewalls seem to be all closed source, and it's really interesting to look at those things. Secondly, new security vulnerabilities are every sysadmin's nightmare. If somebody walks into your system, which is like, well, Netscape Enterprise web server and a Lotus Domino SMTP server behind a Firewall 1, it just hops from the Lotus Domino to the, I don't know, Netscape Enterprise and starts collecting everything, like harvesting POP passwords from the SMTP server and so on. You're screwed majorly. And when that happens with zero-day exploits, you don't see it coming. Actually, I started this entire security crap by doing pen testing in Asia. And there was a case where we were auditing a bank, and they had this kind of setup with Netscape Enterprise and Lotus Domino behind a Firewall 1. And it looked really tight from the outside. And on the inside network, all connections were going over SSL. So if anybody compromised the box on the inside, you couldn't sniff passwords. But I did some work on Lotus Domino and came up with a nice overflow, which we could exploit, and which then in turn allowed us to harvest POP passwords because everybody was logging in over SSL. But in the server memory of the POP server, the passwords were still there in clear text. So they got screwed majorly. Anyways, if you're a white hat, there are a few reasons to do the same thing. First off, you can annoy your vendor, and it's fun to do that. And secondly, you can get an impression how good the code is you're looking at. If you look at an application, it takes you a day to find an overflow, just don't buy it. I mean, seriously, if you can see that the code, you can get an impression how well or with how much security in mind the code has been written. And if it's crap, and you will not deploy it. So it's, actually it would be a good thing to do. There's software certification, like ICSA is doing that. And it would be a good idea if ICSA would actually look at the programs that they're certifying instead of just looking at the abstract architecture and getting money for it. But apparently there are no people that are actually paying for having a reverse engineer look at products. Anyways, going to the different approaches for auditing binaries, there's approach A, stress testing. There are about a gazillion Perl scripts that'll do that, and there's anti-Omex for those that don't know Perl and like a GUI. And then there's Retina, which is a network security scanner by EI, which claims to have fantastic AI to mine for holes. It's basically the same AI that's built into Perl. It's a great product. Anyways, this works by having, like, constructing long strings, walking the protocol, sending them to the server and hoping it'll crash. The advantages of this are that a stress testing tool that has been written for a particular protocol, like for SMTP, can be reused for any SMTP server out there. So you write it once and you use it many times. Second advantage is it will work automatically. So you start your stress testing tool, you go out to lunch, and after that you'll have a buffer overflow or you won't. So you don't need to spend days in front of the decompiler or disassembler and soft ice or whatever. Then it does not really require much skill to use. I mean, everybody can just start, just about everybody knows Perl, and very few people know assembly. So it's much easier to get somebody to write a stress testing tool than to get somebody to look at the disassembly. The cons of the entire approach are that you have to know the protocol before you start. If they're using an undocumented protocol, proprietary protocol, whatever, you'll have no clue what to look for or what kind of strings to construct. So you have to figure out the protocol first. Secondly, complex problems will be missed. I've seen situations where you could overflow a buffer on the stack, but you couldn't actually, overflow anything useful, just a string that got passed to a printf function afterwards as format string. So you had a combination, basically, where you overflowed something which could then be used for a format string attack. So those are things that you will definitely not find using stress testing. Thirdly, you will not find any undocumented options. You will not find out if the program is actually adhering to the RFC. If they have some weird functions or misbehaving functions in there, you will not figure it out. And you'll miss all backdoors. Then there's approach B, which Joey demonstrated in Black Hat Singapore last year, or was it the year before? Which is basically, you take a reverse engineer, he sits down in front of the disassembly, and then he starts looking for the rec call or wherever data is coming in and starts reading the disassembly from there. But the problem with this, or the pro of this approach, is that you'll find very, very complex things if you actually read the entire disassembly. But seriously, the process, like nobody's ever going to read an entire application in the disassembly. It'll take you weeks and you'll be bogged down chasing down tentacles in big applications like Netscape Enterprise. You go through a whole bunch of functions which have no security impact, have no bad coding in them, and you'll be old before you find something. And you need highly specialized auditor. You need somebody like Joey or somebody like me or somebody who's insane enough to spend his free time in front of the disassembler to do it. And there's a very big danger that the auditor will burn out. It happened to me a few times before I came up with scripting. That just sit in front of an application, and after a week you are burnt out on that application. You don't feel like looking at it anymore, and your work gets shoddier. You just are not focused on it anymore. So it's a good thing to do, but why make your life hard when you can make life easier? That's where the third approach comes into play. That's what I'm doing. It's looking for suspicious constructs. There are a lot of C functions that are known to be problematic, strr copy, strn copy, and so on. So you basically try to identify those suspicious code constructs, and once you identify a suspicious construct, you work from there, you analyze it further and look whether it's actually exploitable. So the advantage of this is you have reasonable depth, you're going a lot deeper than stress testing, and you'll find some very, very obscure problems already. Secondly, it saves a lot of time in comparison to approach B. A lot of time, I'm speaking like factor 5, factor 10. And the most important part is that you can automate the process of scanning for suspicious constructs. So you have a script or a program that scans through a binary, looks for stuff that's suspicious, and then tells you about it, and you can look at it later on and figure out whether it's actually dangerous. We're going to go into that in the second half of the speech. Now the cons are that you will, since you're not reading every line of code, you'll miss problems. You're not actually doing a full-blown audit, you can't be sure that you haven't missed anything. Secondly, you need to be highly specialized. Thirdly, reading the code backwards is very, very frustrating in a way, because frequently you'll have stuff where you find something that's suspicious, you find something that looks exploitable, and you figure out for some reason it's not. I was at the CCC Congress around New Year, and a friend of mine and me, we audited NC-FTPD, which is a closed source FTP daemon for Linux, for format string bugs, because we assumed that NC-FTPD hadn't been audited for that. And we found a few occasions where we had format string bugs, but when we traced the code backwards, which took a few hours, we figured out that you need root in order to supply those things, because you'd have to write to certain files. So, and those files are root-owned, and only root can write to them. So exploiting something when you're root doesn't really make sense. So it was like, hey, we got something in NC-FTPD, and 2 hours later you're like, well, next target. So it can be frustrating. And if you don't find anything, you still have to read the entire application. So skills that the auditor needs is, first off, good understanding of assembly language and compiler internals, and probably executable structure is important as well. You need assembly language for reading this stuff, and compiler internals for recognizing the structures or the things, for recognizing how a particular compiler does a particular thing in order to identify what's suspicious. Then you need a good knowledge of C and C++ and the coding mistakes that lead to problems, because only if you know what's happening on a C level, you can actually know what's happening on an assembly level at that point. So that's something you really need. And you need a lot of endurance, patience, time, more endurance, more patience, more time, a lot of chocolate against frustration, and time. Then, yeah?
You only look at the C code, and different languages might have different constructs. Like when I need to be an expert in COBOL, if I wanted to reverse engineer a COBOL binary or something like that, do you have any thoughts on that?
Actually, I've never looked at COBOL binaries.
I just use that as an example. I never had any.
Actually, I'm specializing in C and C++ stuff, because there's a lot of stuff that's known to be problematic in C. I mean, C was basically not designed to be insecure, but it's a very hard language to use, and it gives the programmer a lot more rope to hang himself with than he actually needs. And stuff like Ada, for example, does not have the same properties. So I'll only go into C stuff here, and I haven't played a lot with anything but C. I've played a bit with Delphi, but there are no security vulnerabilities there. I've just played with source code retrieval or reconstruction. So anyways, the only tool that the auditor really needs is IDA Pro. I was saying that in my class, and everybody already had a copy of it. So I'm doing advertisement here for that company. Anyways, it's a disassembler, and it's basically the only disassembler that's, well, that's worth not blowing to hell. It's a great program. Basically, it's the first disassembler that can be called a disassembler. It does great work. It does automatic reconstruction of the stack frame. It automatically recognizes statically linked library calls, can disassemble anything from MIPS, Spark, x86, your PlayStation, my toaster, whatever. You get really awesome technical support. The author added about 5 to 6 features to the internal scripting language because I was crashing it all the time with my scripts. So you ask the author something, and he'll get back to you within a day or two and explain explain this stuff to you. If you have questions about internal structures and of IDA and so on, he'll document that for you. It's it's great technical support. And well, you have a powerful plugin SDK and CPU module SDK. So if IDA isn't doing what you want it to, you can make it do what you want it to. It's a great product. Okay, let's go into recapitulating what kind of C problems there are. I guess it's old news to everybody in this room that string copy can be dangerous. So I will not go into that. If a string copy copies user-supplied or non-static data into a buffer, it's inherently dangerous. If a sprintf expands any string that is not static in the binary into a buffer, well, then we have something that's dangerous as well, and we usually can identify that by looking for %s in the format string. Then there's the entire scanf family, which is quite dangerous as well. If somebody parses user-supplied input, well, parses these things into strings into buffers using the %s format string, then you should have a look at that as well, because that's dangerous. Then there's the supposedly safe prototypes in C. Now, these supposedly safe prototypes have their pitfalls on their own, and they're a lot of fun to look at, because nowadays there are very few plain string copy overflows around, but there are a lot of mistakes when using strn CPY or strn cat. So the problem with strn CPY is that it does not properly null terminate once the end of maxlen, like the maxlen parameter, the amount of maximum bytes that we're copying is maxed out. So once we reach this number, there will be no null termination of the buffer. So if we're copying a large string into a smaller buffer, and we're using the code we had on the slide before, I'll quickly go back to that, wait a second, with size of destination buffer, then our string will not be null terminated. And any subsequent operations on this string will operate on the data behind our original string as well. That can lead to a variety of problems, from buffer overflows to well, data disclosure on the stack, to pointer corruption due to some kind of string parsing and so on. So once you have a strn copy, which copies stuff with the size of destination buffer instead of size of destination buffer -1 as maximum parameter, it's dangerous. Next thing, my favorite, is strncat. Strncat does always null terminate, but it null terminates 1 byte after maxlen. So if you max out the entire length that you're told the function to use, it will write a null byte behind that maxlen. So if you use size of as size of destination buffer as maximum parameter, you write a null byte behind your original buffer. And on the x86 calling convention, or CPU and calling convention, you can usually overwrite EBP, or the low order byte of EBP at that point. It's called one-off or poison null byte. And the entire stack frame will then slide down one function layer outwards. So you can basically supply ESP at that point. When you can supply ESP, you can supply EIP, and you're in trouble again. So that's something that happens frequently. And another thing that's nice about strncat is it has to deal with dynamic maxlength parameters. I mean, strncopy will always should have a static maxlength parameter. Now, strncat doesn't know how long the string is it's appending to, so you have to do some arithmetic on it or calculations on it. And that raises the danger of screwing them up and pushing the maxlength parameter to a negative value. And as we all know, negative values are represented by very, very big values in the computer. So you'll have a maximum length of the string you're appending of like 4 billion characters, which is a long string to append. So if we consider code like this, an strncat into a destination buffer from a source, and well, actually I fumbled here. So this is just a regular thing where we write an extra null byte behind the original buffer. So when we're maxing out this buffer, we'll fill up the entire buffer, and then strncat will null terminate our string and write a null byte behind our original buffer. So this code is dangerous. And I was talking about dynamic maxlength values. In this case, can anybody, well, let's just assume that source 1 is a relatively long buffer. So first off, we'll copy a limited amount of characters into buffer, and then we'll append source 2 to our original buffer. Now you see those calculations over there. Sorry, I don't have a laser pointer. But there's the size of buff minus strlen, like string length of source 1. Now source 1 is not buffer, so source 1 can be a very high value. So at this point, we can push the entire maxlength parameter into the negatives, and therefore we'll append a string of arbitrary size with the strncat. So this has to be, well, this is one of the more fun things to look at because it happens in a lot of very security conscious code. While we're at security conscious code, this is code written by AdStack. Can anybody spot the mistake? The data at char pointer DNS label is user supplied, and there is a buffer overflow in there. So if anybody spots the mistake, I'd be happy. No one? Sorry?
It's negative.
If what is negative?
The first character of the DNS label is greater than 80x,
127.
then it's considered, since char is a side entity,
Yeah.
it will be side extended.
Yeah. Okay, that's it. Congratulations. I had nobody in my class. Well, were you in my class in the trainings? Okay, because I had nobody in my class get it. Anyways, congratulations to finding this. This is code from Loft's anti-sniff. And basically what happens is that int is assigned value, char is assigned value, or is assigned variable. And at this point, if we have a value of over 127 for the first byte of DNS label, then the highest order byte will be extended all the way through count. So you have a really big value or a negative value at this point. Now, if you have a negative value in count, then we can basically make this check pass. Because count is negative, the string length will be added to it. So we can deduct from the string length of the buffer we already have. So we pass this check, and then go on to overflow the buffer right here. Now, cast screw-ups are fun because it happens mostly to people that are writing or that are supposed to be writing secure code. It happened to Loft. It happened to Route, the current editor of Frac, when he fixed Gopher-D. So if you're looking for stuff in secure or supposedly secure applications, look for cast screw-ups. There's been an SSHD bug on Bugtrack a week ago or so in 1X versions, which was a real subtle cast screw-up. And well, it just tells you that even well-audited code can contain cast screw-ups. Did anybody look at that SSHD stuff, actually? It's interesting because if I was going to implement, to place a backdoor in an open source software, I'd write code and I'll put a real subtle cast screw-up in there, and then I'll get my code added to the CVS tree because like 3 or 4 people would be reading it and they'd be missing the point. And the code that was exploitable in SSHD, almost, I'm not implying that core SDI added a backdoor, but that code at that point looks more like a constructed vulnerability than a coding screw-up. And afterwards, after this comes out, I wouldn't be liable for anything because nobody can prove to me that I'm smarter than I look. So cast screw-ups are definitely fun and play with them. Now, everybody knows about format string vulnerabilities by now. They become public last summer with the WooFTP exploit. They've been around to, or available to certain people in the underground for a couple of years before that. And I assume that everybody is familiar that you can exploit format strings by adding %n characters to the format string. Anyways, any printf family call that passes user-supplied data as a format string is dangerous. And you can define this as an argument deficiency because, well, a properly coded printf call has 2 arguments: the format string and the stuff that gets extended in the format string. There's no reason ever to only have 1 argument in a printf unless it's enclosed in double quotes, like printf hello world. So anytime you have a printf that has only 1 argument, or which lacks 1 argument, and which is not enclosed, 1 argument is not enclosed in double quote, it's dangerous. Okay, for those, is there anybody here who doesn't know assembly? Okay, that's good. Last time I was holding this speech in Amsterdam, there were like 3 people in my entire room who knew assembly. So that was a pretty sad thing. Anyways, when looking at disassembly, one has to identify which arguments are passed to a certain C function. And usually if you're looking at the nth argument, you have to look for the nth push before the call. First argument, first push before the call. Second argument, second push before the call. And third argument, third push before the call. So that's just for those of you that are not all that familiar with C calling conventions. So this is how a suspicious string copy call looks in the disassembly. We have the call to the string copy function, which has been recognized by IDA, by the disassembler. As a target buffer, or as a source buffer, we do not have a static string. We have something that's dynamically generated or generated on the fly, runtime, could be user supplied. And we have a destination buffer, which is on the stack, which is 400 hex bytes long. So this has to be considered dangerous and should be investigated. Then we have a sprintf here in the disassembly, which targets a static stack buffer of 100 hex bytes, and which expands 2 non-static strings into it using %s in the format string. So this is dangerous as well. Then there's the scanf or scanf function call here, which has a format string which contains %s, and which parses the stuff, or parses several strings with these %s signs into these stack buffers here. So this scanf call has to be considered dangerous as well. Is anybody keeping track how often I said dangerous today? Anyways, an strn CPY call, which is dangerous as well. This one is copying data from a dynamic source into a stack buffer again. And we have a max length parameter of 4,000 bytes. Now, if our buffer is only 4,000 bytes long, no null byte will be appended to it. It will not be null terminated. So we look at the stack frame in IDA, and we can see that the buffer is only 4,000 bytes long. So this would be dangerous as well. Then we have an strncat here, which subtracts something from the max length parameter before calling strncat. So if you have an strncat which subtracts something from your max length parameter, you should probably be looking into that as well, because perhaps you can push the max length into the negative at some point. Then when it comes to detecting cast screw-ups, it's going to be a bit tough. As we've seen before, they're already, well, pretty tough to find in the source, and they're really, really a bitch to find in the disassembly. Something that's usually good to be on the lookout for is looking for functions that use size t for memory copying, like fgets, like strncopy. then looking whether the size t parameter, the maximum parameter that is being passed, is dynamic, is not something hard-write like 3,000 bytes. And if it's dynamic, you look at all the accesses to this size t parameter beforehand. So if it was loaded with a move SX instruction, move with sign extend, then that's dangerous, as we've seen before in the loft code. Then, otherwise, if it's being subtracted from, then it's dangerous as well, because we can perhaps push it into the negatives. So cast scrubs are really tough to find, and if you find one, be happy and applaud yourself and take a vacation for a week somewhere really nice where there's no computer around. Format string vulnerabilities. They're really easy to find in the source, and they will not be around for long, so let's all enjoy them while they're here. And in the source, they're very easy to spot due to the fact that we can immediately see, does this printf family function call have an argument deficiency or not? In the disassembly, we usually have, well, we can pretty much estimate whether a call has an argument deficiency or not, at least in unoptimized code. Because after the call, we have the C stack correction, where the compiler corrects the stack again. I mean, it pushes stuff on the stack, and after the call, it has to take that stuff off the stack again. So it adds the number of bytes, the parameters used up, to the stack after the call. So we can identify argument deficiencies by looking at the stack correction. Now, in this case, we have a sprintf. Sprintf has to have 3 parameters to be correct: target buffer, format string, data that is being expanded into the format string. So we have only 2 double words here, so this is an argument deficiency. And we have a format string that is dynamic instead of static. So it's not enclosed in square brackets in the source, so it's dangerous. Now, does anybody have a watch? I don't know whether I'm going through this too fast. 3:13? Oh God. Well, we have to chat a bit later, like at the end of this half. Anyways, I'm going after Netscape Enterprise SHTML DLL. I had a buffer overflow in that one last fall, which I presented in Amsterdam. And basically, I was too lazy to get another target. And the SHTML DLL was already disassembled on my computer. And this is a really small computer and has 32 megabytes of RAM. So disassembly takes forever and ever. So I decided just to use what I already have. Plus, the SHTML code has been written, it's been added code in the 4.0 version, and new code is bad code. Secondly, well, I've worked with it before, and they had a simple buffer overflow in a sprintf statement. It was so simple that I was pretty sure I'd find another thing. And this SHTML DLL was written shortly before format string bugs were published. And we all know how closed source works. If it ain't, well, if the customer's not complaining, we're not going to audit our code. So we can be pretty sure that this DLL has never been audited for format string bugs. So well, I looked at the disassembly, and inside Netscape Enterprise, there's an internal logging function called indlogError, which is basically a wrapper around vsprintf, and which will write error messages to the error log. Pretty straightforward. It is a sprintf-like function, and first thing when we're looking at it is figuring out how much stack correction we actually need. Like, what would be proper usage of this function and what is not. We can see in this example that we have 2 format characters in the format string. So we have 8 bytes in total on the stack as parameters to the format string. Now, we only need 1 format string character to have like good code. We don't need to have several of them, but we have to have a real format string with 1 format character in there. So we can calculate that the correct stack correction in this case, -4, is the stack correction that we need. So 1C minus 4 is 18 hex. That's the correct number of arguments, or the correct stack correction for an indlogError call. Is that clear to everybody? Anything unclear? No? Is my audience talking to me? No? All right. Nah, you were scaring me before. Anyways, back to business. Now, when looking through the SHTML DLL, I found this nice construct where we have an argument efficiency. I mean, 14 is less than 18. Everybody can like understand that. And then we have a dynamic format string. So I looked, like, traced the code backwards and looked where this format string was being constructed. I landed in this code, where there's basically a statically compiled string copy, the rep emove sd, rep emove sb, and so on. And it copies, or is it a mem copy? It's probably a mem copy in this case. Anyways, it's copying the string not a valid SSI tag colon into our buffer, or into the buffer that is being passed as format string later on. Then I went a bit further to see what happens. And I found this, which is basically some C++ safe string class code, which will ensure that the buffer we're copying to is large enough in order to prevent buffer overflows. So they're trying to prevent buffer overflows here. And we'll have this string class size checking. And then they're appending user-supplied data. So at this point, I knew this was vulnerable. And this was vulnerable to a non-valid SSI tag, because they had this error message, not a valid SSI tag double dot, or colon. So I started creating an SHTML file, a small one. This one here, which basically is just a small SHTML file which has an invalid SSI tag of sick and a couple of format string characters afterwards, which are just, they're not used to exploit anything, they'll just print out the stack at that point. So create this file, enabled Netscape Enterprise to parse this file, and well, you have to wait a second for my code. Okay. And then I requested the file from the web server. It was parsed. Then I looked at the error log, and bingo, we have a nice format string bug, which is exploitable as soon as you can write to an SHTML file or to a file that's being parsed by the SHTML parser. So that was fun. I contacted Netscape about this. The last time I contacted them about buffer overflow, it took half a year to get back to me. And this time they were really quick. 3 days later, they gave me a binary, which was fixed apparently, and which had full debug info in there, which was very nice for me as well. And they've been having this fixed binary for 8 weeks now, and they say they're not ready to put the fix up on the web page. So please don't publish this yet. So I assume that you're all security professionals, you're not going to do anything stupid with this, so this is disclosed to a small audience. It will be on Bugtrack as soon as Netscape decides that they've had enough time, well, not doing anything and leaving the executable there. Another funny thing about Netscape is I told them that they have this problem in multiple instances. They have multiple calls to this log error call, which are problematic, which I didn't look at because I got my exploit, and they should fix all of them. When I looked at the fixed version they sent me, they fixed one. So, well, that's the way closed source seems to work. Anyways, I'm just trying to waste some time here right now because this is basically the first half of my presentation. Are there any questions or anything you people want to talk about? Or, yeah?
Okay, so I passed user input directly to printf. When you say it's exploitable, what can you do with it? You can obviously print the stack and print the middle.
You can execute arbitrary code on the server.
How do you do that?
Okay, actually, it's a pity I don't have my presentation. I did a speech on that in Berlin on New Year's. Anyways, the trick is that if you have, we'll take a sprintf call, which passes user-supplied data, and now you supply this buffer, and then you can basically, do you know about the %n character? %n will write the length of the string that has been written so far, or that would have been written so far, into a location which has been given in the printf call. So basically what you do is you start popping the stack by doing something like %lx, for example, which will pop 4 bytes of the stack. You work upwards the stack until you're in your own buffer. And then you do something like %, any number you want, lx, you buffer your string to the byte you want to write, and then you use the %n to write 1 byte or write like a word at once, and will write arbitrary data into arbitrary memory locations. And what you do on Linux normally is you overwrite a pointer in the GOT, in the global offset table where all the dynamically linked functions are put in. And next time that function gets called, your code gets controlled. Under NT, the import table is usually write protected, so you can't do that. But you can do some pretty nifty stuff with overwriting exception handlers in memory or trying to overwrite stack addresses, which is not very stable but works sometimes. So it is exploitable. I mean, have you looked at the WooFTP exploit? Okay. Well, format strings are exploitable, and actually I think they're easier to exploit than buffer overflows because you can write to any location in memory and not just to the stuff behind your buffer. And even once people implement non-executable pages, format string bugs will still remain dangerous because you can manipulate variables inside the application. So like a Boolean is he authenticated can be overwritten with true. So while you cannot execute code anymore, you can still manipulate a lot. So format string bugs are definitely fun. Any other questions or any other way to waste our time now?
I was finding a construct of the format string.
Sorry?
On this one of the slides, you said you showed the construct of finding the format string on SHTML.
Yeah.
The offset that you were talking about, 8 or something?
18?
Like you mentioned the offset for the buffer or DDP.
I'm not sure what exactly you're speaking about. Can I have a look at that?
So the slide is an example of ISW 4.1 SHTML.
Okay.
Which is construct.
Wait a second.
Like this right here.
Okay.
Like you're saying, this format string is dynamic.
Yeah.
Like where, I can't say, okay, where do I input my exploit in that code? That's what I want.
Where you put your exploit on that code? Well, wait a second.
So I think to find something I can't actually exploit.
Well, the exploit goes into this, the %LX and stuff. The buffer we have after the SIG is the buffer that our exploit goes into. So if we can actually, well, if we can print the stack, as we could in this example, we can start doing some other stuff like trying to pop from the stack, getting into our own buffer, and then exploiting. So basically your shell code and everything, or not necessarily the shell code, but the addresses you're willing to write to and the format strings that actually exploit everything would go into this string, which is right after this SICK. Did that answer your question, or?
Kind of, sort of. I'm more concerned with
All right. Anything else? Okay.
Your toolkit that you have when you do your work, do you use soft dice?
For debugging my exploits, yes. But I'm doing a lot of cross-platform work. I'm looking at Spark disassembly a lot. I've looked at a few embedded things, and well, I use ADB for debugging on Sun. I use GDB for debugging onto Linux, and I use soft dice on NT. So when you're actually looking into exploiting stuff, you'll need a debugger. But while looking for the suspicious stuff, you don't necessarily need it yet. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Today, or usually in programming C++ and SQL,
Sorry?
usually modern programming uses SQL, for example, C++.
Yeah.
Okay, so eliminates most of the buffer overflows caused by all the SPR and SPDF and assuming the SQL stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, is there like other ways of handling C++ code?
Well, there's a lot of C++ code that still calls legacy functions in some way. And well, there's stuff in C++ usually which is not a basic string overflow, but you can have like array overflows where you overflow an array of anything like double words or whatever. So at that point, it usually comes down to supplying wrong values for the C++ code to copy. There isn't like standard functions in C++ that are immediately broken, but a lot of C++ code, I mean, even C++ uses printf. So, And if you can overwrite the code and like overwrite allocated buffers, malloc buffers at that point, you can write to arbitrary locations in memory as well. So C++ is a good thing, but this SHTML DLL is a good example where supposedly safe programming breaks the neck of the programmer in the end, because they break the interoperability with legacy code at this point. If they had used straight C and if they had been aware of everything, they wouldn't have done the format string bug here. And the format string bug basically came around because their great standard string class was doing all the formatting for them, so they were just passing the already formatted string as format string. Any other questions? No? Well, what time is it? 3:30. Should we go into the second half already, or should we take a break right now?
I think we'll take a break, because maybe someone will take a break.
Okay, so we'll take a break right now. In a big application, like, for example, in iMail, which isn't all that big, you have a whole lot of calls to sprintf. In this case, we have 123, which is not that much, but it's a bit annoying to go every one of those, and they have like %d in the format string, or %x in the format string, and they're not really interesting. So I'll go over a script that does check for these criteria. First off, it checks whether, or it should check whether the string expands data into a buffer using %s. Then it should look whether the call targets a stack buffer. Furthermore, it should look out for argument deficiencies in order to find format bugs. And then it should check if an argument deficiency is found, whether the format string is dynamic or static. So those are the criteria the script will be on the lookout for. And I'll just go over the code, and then we'll have a demonstration of the script running. First off, in order to actually check whether the stack correction of a printf call is right or is wrong, like is big enough or too small, we have to retrieve the stack correction somehow from the binary. So this is a function in IDA's internal scripting language, which is called IDC, which will basically, you feed it the pointer to the call, which you're looking at, and it will then start tracing the code from there on until it finds an add ESP instruction. So as soon as it finds an add ESP instruction, it will return the value that has been added. Any questions about this code? No? Okay. Then the second thing that I had to write is this get binary string. Well, the problem with IDA's internal scripting language is that it doesn't have any function that allows me to retrieve a string of bytes from the executable. So when we're looking at the format string, we have to somehow retrieve that and to put it into an IDC variable, an IDC string, in order to do checks on it, like check whether it contains a %s, or even check whether it's dynamic or not. So this short function here will basically read out the string out of a binary by first creating an empty string, and then reading one byte at a time and then looping that until we find either a null byte or an FF. And then it will use IDC's internal sprintf-like function to append the single byte we just read to the string we already have with that %s, %c. Is that code clear?
Why FF?
Well, because FF is something that is probably not a valid string. It's just something that happened to me frequently, that when I was looking at strings that were not static, that I had to, well, was reading in arbitrary memory, and once you hit FF, you're pretty safe that this is not a valid string. You could probably add other non-displayable characters. To do a good script here would be to check whether the byte is within the range of displayable characters, but I was too lazy to do that. So, and it will probably clutter up the code as well and would not make anything clearer here. Then the next thing we have to do is we have to write a function that retrieves the nth argument to a call. So when we're looking at, for example, for the format string in a sprintf function, we have to retrieve the second argument. First argument is the destination buffer. Second argument is the format string. And we have to have a function that locates this particular value. Now, usually we look for the nth push before a call. I explained that before. Then we have to check whether a register or an immediate value was pushed. Now, if a register was pushed, we have to find out where this register was loaded and what it was loaded with, and then return that value. And in case an immediate value was pushed, like an offset to a string, we just return that value. So this is a very, very simple argument tunneler. I've written a few more advanced ones in IDC, which do full recursion and so on. That was when I always got the IDC language to crash, because originally it wouldn't support more than 6 layers of recursion. And when you're looking at large trees, then, well, 6 layers is nothing. And main thing is that this code will not trace back if an argument to a call has been an argument to the function calling it. So if you have a function that gets past a pointer, and that function is using a string copy to copy into the buffer at the pointer it was passed, this script will just give up and do nothing. So it's just checking for stuff that's actually being generated in the function. So it starts out by tracing the code backwards until the nth push is called or is found. In this case, we have n, which is the number of arguments we're getting. So we're tracing upwards one instruction at a time, and each time we find a push, we decrement n, and as soon as n is 0, we know that we have the push we need. From that push on, we get the operand type of the push, and if it's a register, the operand type will be 1. So if it is a register, then we trace the code backwards from where we are at until the last time the register was the first operand to an assembly instruction. Now, we all know Intel syntax says that the destination of an assembly instruction is always the first operand. So, well, as soon as we have any assembly instruction that has our register as first operand, we know it's being loaded with a value. This code just does that, and then returns the value we found. And if it wasn't a register in the first place, we return the value that was pushed. So that code clear to everybody? Okay.
Skipping places with conditional execution.
Sorry? This code is not doing conditional execution backtracking. I have a few very, very freaking complex scripts that I can't read myself anymore, which basically trace the code flow backwards, and then if they get into infinite loop, they'll have to keep track of which places they already visited. It gets really messy and really ugly at that point, and you're probably out of your league if you're trying to do that in IDC. I have a bunch of IDC scripts which were very ambitious to start with, and they got more complex and complex and complex until I figured out I needed structures. IDC doesn't have structures, so I implemented structures in IDC by concatenating strings. I know I'm insane, yes. Anyways, that got so unmanageable that I decided to restart the entire thing and do it as an IDA plugin. With an IDA plugin, you get full C++ structures, linked list, trees, all the stuff that you want. And for complex analysis, scripts will not do. But scripts are very nice because they take next to no time to write. So if you're auditing and building the tool you're using for auditing takes longer than auditing, then you will not build that tool. But if scripting takes like 10 minutes and saves you 4 hours, then you'll script. So, well, main point is that you can go into a lot of detail when it comes to automatic analysis. There are certain people who have a lot of time on their hand and a lot of funding from somewhere who actually have tools that do very complex analysis of binaries. And this is just an example that every one of us can do the same thing. And if this gets you nosy, you can start writing plugins in IDA. Problem with plugins is you get 15 header files, no documentation, and you're on your own. It's fun, but nonetheless. So if you're going to go into complex stuff like argument backtracking and tracing back the entire call tree and reconstructing where what argument is accessed, you shouldn't be using the scripting language. Now, this is the sprintf auditing call, or the sprintf auditing function. It's basically a function which you feed a particular sprintf call, and it will then evaluate the danger of that sprintf call. First off, it starts by cleaning up the arguments you gave it, because usually you'll pass something like offset whatever to it, or it'll pass off. Wait a second. No, this code. Sorry, I screwed up. This code will clean up the arguments, the format string arguments, because if you're pushing a pointer to the format string, IDA will put the string offset in front of it. So what this line is doing is just stripping the word offset out of there. So then the script gets the stack correction of our sprintf call, and then compares it to to the value of 12, which is the correct correction for a sprintf call. And if we actually do have an argument deficiency, it will try to check how long the format string is. Now, the smallest legit format string is 2 bytes, which is % something, or I don't know. Anyways, assuming the format string is smaller than 2 bytes, then we'll assume that it's not a format string, but something that's dynamically generated. So in this case, we're going to put out a message. We have a format string problem here. The slide is skipping over that, but we'll demonstrate that in a minute. So the second thing the script will do is it will look for a %s in the format string by using str. And if a %s is found, it will look whether the target buffer is a stack variable. Now this is all very cheap string matching in IDA. This is not checking for heap buffers. This is not checking for malloc buffers. This is just checking for stack buffers. So again, it's not a very in-depth analysis, but it's getting the job done to a certain degree. And personally, I'm happy as soon as I found one exploit. I don't need, when I'm looking at binaries, I don't need to secure them, I need to break them. So it's okay if I miss a couple of more obscure problems as long as I find one. So I don't really care that much about having a great accuracy. Now, if these conditions are met, then we'll put out a message, hey, we have an overflow problem here, please look in this. So this is the entire sprintf auditing script now, or the main function, which will start by asking the user for an address where the sprintf call is located. And then it'll go through, once for each call to the sprintf location, it will call the audit sprintf function. And after that has been done, it will repeat the same process for all data references to the sprintf function. So if you have an indirect call, it'll pass through all these calls as well. Any questions concerning the code I've presented so far? No? Okay, we can have a short demonstration right now. Now normally we'd have to go into IMail and look at every single sprintf call and see whether the format string contains a %s or whether it has an argument deficiency. Now, we're not going to do that. We're just going to take our script. It's a slow box, please excuse that. Our script will ask us for an address. We feed it an address, and then it'll run and put out all the suspicious calls and their addresses. And now we can have a look at every single suspicious call that it put out and evaluate whether this call was dangerous or not. Is that clear to everybody? Okay. All right. What time is it right now? 5 to 4. So are we going to take a break right now and then? I don't have a microphone anymore. Okay. What I suppose that we do right now is we'll go off to the coffee break and then we'll come back and look at an strn CPY auditing script, and then we'll look a bit into automated structure reconstruction. And if your head's not hurting by then we can still go into threat evaluation, like risk evaluation when we have a dangerous call and so on. So is that all right with everybody, or any questions right now, or anything you'd like to do in the second half? Nothing? Okay. Something that I noticed about American audiences is they seem to be a lot quieter than the European ones. I mean, I didn't have quite such a technical audience in Europe. Took me 1.5 hours for the stuff that I covered until our first break there. But they were asking me questions at least all the time, so I felt I had something to do. Nothing here? Okay, break.